Welcome to Profit Boss Radio, where successful women have paved the road to their own financial freedom. Each week, your host, Hilary Hendershot, financial coach, money mindset expert, and experienced wealth manager, will help you discover the keys to the wealth and peace of mind you want and deserve in her no-nonsense and authentic style. Starting right now.
Profit Boss, I'm your host, Hilary Hendershot, coming to you with episode 45. I'm a little bit fangirling today. I got to interview Dan Ariely. If you don't already know who Dan is, you're going to be blown away today. He is a world-famous economist. Let me read to you just a little bit about him. He's a founding member of the Center for Advanced Hindsight, co-creator of the film documentary Dishonesty, The Truth About Lies, and a 3-time New York Times best-selling author. His books include Predictably Irrational, The Upside of Irrationality, The Honest Truth About Dishonesty, and Irrationally Yours. His next and newest book, Payoff, is live and available this month, November 2016. Dan writes this: despite our best intentions, why do we fail to act in our own best interest? Why do we promise to skip the chocolate cake only to find ourselves drooling our way into temptation when the dessert tray rolls around? Why do we overvalue things that we've worked to put together? What are the forces that influence our behavior? Dan Ariely, James B. Duke Professor of Psychology and Behavioral Economics at Duke University, is dedicated to answering those questions and others in order to help people live more sensible, if not rational, lives. His interests span a wide range of behaviors, and his sometimes unusual experiments are consistently interesting, amusing, and informative, demonstrating profound ideas that fly in the face of common wisdom. In 2013, Bloomberg recognized Dan as one of its top 50 most influential thinkers. He also has a bi-weekly advice column in the Wall Street Journal called Ask Ariely. He can be found at danariely.com. I hope you enjoy this conversation where I got Dan to speak directly to you, my Profit Boss audience, about why women are making mistakes with money, why we're still disadvantaged financially. If you look at all of women vis-a-vis all of men, we are not saving and investing and growing wealth like men are. And then we talk a little bit about Dan's new book. I hope you enjoy the show. For more about Dan, to watch the documentary and pick up a copy of his new book, go to hilaryhendershot.com/45. Dan Ariely, welcome to Profit Boss Radio.
Wonderful to be here.
Dan, you're an economist, and economics is often called the dismal science. You also don't write about how to get rich quick or conspiracies in the government, and you don't write fiction, yet you're practically a household name. How do you get people so interested in economics and irrationality?
Well, I think that's exactly it, that it's more the irrationality side than economics. And I think, economics for a long time has tried to kind of take math a little bit too seriously and made lots of simplifying assumptions about how people behave in order to fit the math. And the people in my part of the discipline, in behavioral economics, are saying, let's not jump ahead and assume that people are rational and can perfectly think about everything and compute everything. Let's instead put people in different situations. And when you put people in different situations, people actually look a bit more like candid camera than rational beings. Because, when you put a camera to us, you basically find that we are fascinating, interesting, odd, that we don't understand ourselves, that we have all kinds of quirks, and that we make all kinds of mistakes. And just in terms of science, I think that people used to think that the big mysteries of the world are kind of what's out there in the stars or what's in molecular biology or inside the earth. But we're realizing that the stuff between our ears and our brain and our own behavior, even though they're with us all the time, is still something that is kind of bizarre and mysterious, and we don't understand it. And if we pay a bit more attention, we learn a lot about ourselves, but also it's incredibly practical because we can defend ourselves against all kinds of mistakes and do better.
So in terms of studying people, you lean more towards observed psychology than math.
Yes. So what I do is I put people in different situations. So I like to do experiments, which means that I put some people in one situation, some people in a different situation, and I see how people behave differently. So I don't usually like to ask people what they would do. And I often don't like to ask people why they're doing what they're doing. Instead, what I do is to put people in different situations, see how they behave, and infer from that the mechanism. So, if you think about people's risk attitude, if you can ask people about the risk attitude, they'll tell you one thing. But if you observe what they actually do, it's something very, very different. Right. So we like to observe real behavior. And then what we do is we put people in different situations and say, let's see how that changes. So just as an example, in one experiment, we asked people to write down the last 2 digits of the Social Security number. So mine are 79, yours might be 12, whatever it is. And we say, here's a list of 6 products. Tell me whether you would pay that price, $79 or $12 for each of those products. And people say yes, no, yes, no, yes, no. And then we say, okay, now that you've said whether hypothetically you would pay this price, tell us how much you would really pay for it. We'll do an auction and we'll figure out who is the winner and so on. And people for each product look at the product. These are physical products, books, chocolates, and so on. And they set up how much they're willing to pay for them. And then we ask people, do you think that your Social Security number, 79 or 12 or whatever it was, influence your willingness to pay, your bid price? And people say, of course not. But then we calculate whether people with high-ending Social Security number actually set up higher prices than people with low-ending Social Security number, and we find out that's actually the answer. It's sometimes even twice as much. And what happens is that our first decision has the capacity to taint our later decisions without us seeing that. So if I looked at the book and I thought to myself, is this worth $79? And you looked at the same book, and because your Social Security number ends with 12, you thought of it as $12. And maybe I said I would not pay $79, maybe you said you would pay $12. Nevertheless, that number, 79 for me and 12 for you, stayed in our mind for a little too long and has the capacity to influence our later decision. How much would you pay for it? And therefore, you're likely to pay less than I would.
And it makes no sense that my Social Security number would impact how much I would pay for a book, and yet it's true.
Yeah, that's right. It makes no sense. It nevertheless works. And this is a case when we take an arbitrary number, but of course there are many cases in which the numbers are not arbitrary. So think about something like buying a stock. To what extent is your willingness to pay for a stock or to sell a stock influenced by the price you originally paid for it or by something else? How much is it what's called true valuation? Right. Your true understanding of what it is versus something that just happened to be historically something that you remember or something that you did, but over time you get overly attached to that number.
How did you become so interested in studying human irrationality?
So my personal story, I think we all encounter irrationality all the time, but for me, the biggest time when I encountered it in a big way was in hospital. So when I was 18, I was badly burned in about 70% of my body, and I spent a long time in hospital. And hospitals give people a lot of opportunities to observe irrational behaviors. And there were lots of things in hospital. There were things that have to do with painkillers, and there were things with timing and so on. Among them was the question of how to remove bandages from burn patients. And the nurses thought that the right approach is to rip the bandages off quickly, to take a short duration, even at the cost of every second being very painful. So short, very painful duration. Whereas I wanted them to take their time, make the duration longer, but have every second be less painful. And they were sure that what they were doing was right, and I was sure that what they were doing was wrong. But of course, they had the power, so they did what they thought was the right thing to do. Mm-hmm. And when I started studying at the university, one of the first things I tested was exactly that. I put people in the lab and I heard people in different profiles and different durations and different timings. And I found out that indeed the nurses were wrong. That, if you take an experience of pain and you make it twice as long, you don't multiply the pain. But if you take a painful experience and you make the intensity higher, now you've really changed it. So the nurses had kind of the wrong mental model. And of course, I talked to the nurses and I give lots of talks in hospitals since then. But the real question was, how can it be that good people with good intentions, trying to do the best for their patients, their clients, nevertheless are doing things that are wrong, right? And you basically have to realize that we have intuitions about the world, and we have lots of intuitions about the world, and most of our intuitions have not been tested. It's from, if you just look at all of your decisions and you say, how many of those decisions do I really know the answer? And how many of them do I trust my gut intuition?
Uh-huh.
And if you trust your gut intuition, you say, is it accurate? And the interesting thing about starting to doubt your gut intuition is that all of a sudden you get to lots of cases in which you say, oh, I'm just not sure. I'm just not sure what's right. And being unsure, I think, is the first step into getting things to get better, because now you can start testing yourself, trying things in a different way, and maybe improve what we're doing.
Well, you have this whole unknown frontier, right? Could I get my workout done in 30 minutes instead of 60? And that would dramatically improve my life. Your website says, I became engrossed with the idea that we repeatedly and predictably make the wrong decisions in many aspects of our lives, and that research could help change some of those patterns. So, and you did talk about stock price anchoring. And I think that is one of the strangest things I hear people say is, well, I bought it at 100. It's at 90 now. I'm going to wait for it to come back to 100 before I sell it. What are some other wrong decisions you see people make with money?
Well, so first of all, if we think about, before we go into money, if we think about just misery around the world in general, it's very easy to see that most of the misery in the world is man-made, right? From time to time we have a tsunami, from time to time we have some kind of disaster, but most of the stuff we do to ourselves, right? I mean, we text and drive, and we smoke, and we
have insecurities.
Yes, I mean, just lots of things like this. And, many of them are accelerating our mortality and making us very, very miserable. So, you look at it, it is just incredible how many bad decisions we make. And of course, texting and driving is another one that is very salient and common. And nevertheless, most people admit that they're doing it despite knowing that it's really stupid. In terms of financial decision making, there's really a lot of them. And part of the problem, well, there's a couple of problems. So first of all, if you think about money and you ask, what is money all about? Money is all about opportunity cost, right? Every time we spend $3 on a cup of coffee, we don't have these $3 to spend on something else. So that's the essence of money. We don't have money for its own sake. It's only for the use that we have in other things. But the problem is that because we can use money on lots and lots of different things, it is unclear what we're giving up. So imagine I ask you, would you prefer a cup of coffee or a cup of tea? You know which one it is, and if you take coffee, you give up tea. If you take tea, you give up coffee. It's very clear. If I say, would you like to pay $3 for this cup of coffee? What exactly are you giving up if you're getting it? Right? There's no good visceral way for you to represent yourself the opportunity cost. So what do? We behave as if there's no opportunity cost. In English, there's this expression when people talk about difficult decision, they say it's like comparing apples to oranges. The reality is that comparing apples to oranges is very easy. Nobody's baffled by the fruit plate saying, I have no idea which one I want to pick. But figure out whether an apple is worth 75 cents or $1.50 or $2, that's very, very hard. So the first thing to realize is just thinking in terms of money is really tough, because money is all about opportunity cost, and it's hard to think about it. The second thing is that the world around us is trying to make thinking about money harder for us. So think about something like mortgages. It used to be that mortgages had one dimension. What is the percent of interest that you're paying? And when that was it was quite easy to figure out that 4% is more than 375 and 350 is more than 325. But then some people added a second dimension to mortgages. We had interest rate, plus we had how many points do you want to buy. And just adding a second dimension got people confused and got people to start making mistakes. And lots of financial decisions are like that. They are not as simple. The world is trying to make those more difficult for us for all kinds of reasons. And as they become more difficult, even moving from one dimension, which is just percentage to percentage plus points, starts confusing us. And then another big problem is, of course, that saving, I think, is one of the most difficult human challenge of them all. And it's because saving involves two things. It involves now versus later. And we don't do well on every now versus later decision, right? It's why we overeat and don't exercise and all kinds of other things, right? So we see something now, we want it now, and later is not as appealing. So that's what I call hyperbolic discounting. But the second thing is it's also concrete versus abstract. So if I see a new bicycle now, or a bottle of wine, or a book, or whatever it is now. Versus if I save it, it's for, it's abstract.
Right.
Something concrete now and something abstract later, which also makes it hard. So if you think about all of those things, money is about opportunity cost. It's becoming more and more complex because of multi-dimensions. It's now versus later, and it's concrete versus abstract. All of that is making it much, much tougher. And then, of course, there's other little things with money that also makes it more complex. For example, credit cards or Apple Pay and Android Pay. There are lots of new technologies, even credit cards, that at least some of their benefit is to decrease friction, to decrease the costs of transacting. But by doing so, they also decrease the amount of thinking that we have about money. And with that, we actually think less about opportunity costs. So as an example, imagine that you go tonight to dinner. It's an expensive dinner. Let's say it's $125. And you can either pay with cash or with credit card. Which one of those would feel worse to you?
I always pay with a credit card.
Yeah.
I hate cash.
Yeah, that's right. That's what everybody says. Cash is very, very painful. It's painful to spend the cash. Why? What's happening with the cash? Well, what happened is that the cash is creating what we think of as the pain of paying. And let's take a more extreme example for this. Imagine that I owned a restaurant and I figured out that people eat 50 bites and pay $50. And I came to you and I say that because you're such a wonderful person, I'll give you a discount. Instead of $1 per bite, $50, 50 bites, I'll charge you only 50 cents per bite. And not only that, I'll only charge you for the bites you eat. The bites you don't eat, you don't need to pay. So you'll sit back in your chair, I'll serve you your dish, and I'll sit back, I'll take my pencil and my notepad, and every time you take a bite, I'll mark a little V on my notepad. And at the end of the meal, I'll charge you only 50 cents and only for the bites you eat. So it's half price and you only pay for the bites you eat. It's a really good financial deal, but you'll suffer throughout the whole meal.
Because I look like a squirrel preparing for winter.
That's right. You're absolutely right. Sometimes when I teach my class on the psychology of money, I bring pizza and I charge them 25 cents per bite. And what do?
It gets sick.
As you guessed, exactly. They eat such big bites, they suffer from the whole thing because they sit there with the pizza, and if they just eat a regular bite, they will enjoy it. But the temptation to stuff themselves a bit extra and push the pizza a bit more inside is so high because it's financially efficient. But then, of course, they are stuck with too much pizza. It's not pleasurable. So what happened is that, and the pain of paying is kind of a two-edged sword, right? The pain of paying is all about the fact that if we consume and pay at the same time, we enjoy consumption less and we suffer more. And you can say, is this a good thing or a bad thing? Well, it's a bad thing for the joy of the moment. It's a good thing for thinking about money. So you could say, if we took something like electricity and we wanted people to be more cognizant and thoughtful about electricity use, then what we should do is we should put a big meter of electricity consumption in the middle of the kitchen.
Yes.
Or maybe we should even get people to pay. It would be like a cash machine, like one of those things that you stuff bills in, like a vending machine.
So you pay up front before you turn the air conditioning on?
That's right. There used to be these things in England when you would put coins in the heating system and it will run until the heating money ran out. Now, if we had this system, certainly we would be too cold in the winter and too hot in the summer, but we will save energy. So the pain of paying, sometimes we might want more of it and sometimes we might want less of it. But what's interesting is that the people who are designing payments, think about credit card companies, Apple Pay, Android Pay, Square, and so on, they all want us to think less about money. They want the pain of paying to be less because they want us to spend more now, even if it means we'll have less money later. because they're trying to optimize something different than our, overall well-being. They're trying to optimize their short-term well-being, so they want to eliminate the pain of paying. And sometimes it's good for us to eliminate the pain of paying, but in many cases, those mechanisms are actually working against us. So we have a hard time thinking about opportunity cost anyway, but then the people who are designing payment mechanisms want us to think about payment even less. So they design systems that are basically like casinos. I mean, actually, casinos are genius. If you think about money, they really know what they're doing. What happens in a casino? You show up with $1,000 and they make you turn it into chips. And at that moment, you say to yourself, I've lost that money already. I don't know exactly when and how, but this money is allocated to a category of losing in a casino. And it doesn't look like money, it doesn't smell like money. I'm not going to feel bad about it like money. So the chips basically get people to allocate money into this category. And then we have an easy time losing that money because they already have assigned it to this losing category.
Yes.
There's actually lots of sad lessons to learn from casino, but the rest of the world is becoming much more like that. Gift certificates are a little bit like casino, right? When you say, okay, I've given the money to that category and I know it will go into that category already. So if you think about money from an evolutionary perspective, money is a very recent phenomena. And not only is it recent, but it keeps on changing all the time. We have money, we have gift certificates, we have checks, we have cash, we have credit cards, we have points on credit cards, we have stock option, we have bonuses that we feel differently about than regular salary. And we don't have tools to kind of deal with those. So we use all kinds of heuristics to figure out how to deal with this, which are sometimes helpful, but sometimes work against us.
And what's a heuristic?
A heuristic is a shortcut. It's basically a generalized rule that doesn't apply in all cases, and nevertheless we use it in all kinds of cases, even when it doesn't apply.
Like a decision framework.
Decision framework is one example. For this, the decision framework is often a bit more explicit than a heuristic. So if you think about simple heuristic, it's to say something like, what appears more frequently, the letter R in the first place of a letter or in the third place? When you have this decision, you say to yourself, rabbit, and you come up with a few words. It's harder to come up with words that have R in the third place. Just a little harder because you don't have the capacity to start with the letter R and basically make up a few words. So you say, the frequency in which those two things come to mind must be the same frequency that they are in the real world. You don't say, it's because this one is easy and this one is hard. So you go ahead and you assume that more words start with R than have R in the third place. If you think about what we started with, this idea of anchoring, you say to yourself, I've made this decision before. I remember buying this stock for $100, or I remember saying that this thing is worth $79. And you say, if I made this decision in the past, it must be a fantastic decision. Let me do it again. And then again and again and again. So all of those are ways in which we don't think extensively about our decisions. Instead, we just assume that what we've done in the past is a reasonable decision and we just make it again.
So there's a blog article by the CFA Institute that quotes you as saying humans are incapable of thinking rationally about money. I mean, I think everyone always thinks that other people are rational, but that they themselves are rational. Is anyone an exception from this phenomenon?
I don't think so. So listen, here is the thing. Opportunity cost, this idea that every dollar we spend, we could be spending on a million things now and later. How do you even compute this in an extensive way, right? What would you do? So if I said now, here's another $1,000, what is the most rational way to spend it? What are you going to think about? Do you even have a way to think about all the different ways in which you'll buy, what you'll buy, how you'll spend it now and later, and which one will give you the most amount of happiness? Now, you could have some shortcuts. You could say, in the past, I really enjoyed shoes, or in the past, I enjoyed the sweater, or I enjoyed X, Y, or Z. But you're not thinking about everything. We just can't. And the thing is that money is this beautiful thing that requires that we think about everything. but we can't. So, the fact that we can exchange money with everything is a wonderful idea. Like, if you think about money, it's an amazing invention, right? It's kind of at the scale of the wheel in terms of how useful and wonderful it is. But a barter society would be one in which we could think about what we're getting and what we're giving up, right? Do you want this apple? Do you want this orange? Do you want 3 oranges? Or do you want this book, right? We can make those
because you're actually physically trading it.
That's right. And you have a sense of what is the hedonic value of this. But when you say something like, is this backpack worth $75 or $350? I don't know. I don't know how even to compute it, because I need to compare it to all the other things I could be buying and figure out whether this has the highest marginal utility compared to everything else. So when you think about it like this, you realize that the true computation of how to translate money into pleasure would just take us forever to figure out. I'm not sure we can even do it. So we don't. So what do? When we can't do things the right way, we do things the wrong way. And when it comes to money, there's all kinds of wrong ways to use. And we use all kinds of wrong ways.
So a lot of my professional energies right now are directed at trying to motivate women to not only save their money, but to invest it for the purpose of building wealth. And one of the things the research tells us is that women do save money, but we often leave it in cash. So is there a cognitive bias that would explain someone leaving their life savings in a vehicle where we know full well it's losing money over time?
So here's a speculation, and tell me what you think about this. So we know that people like to invest in things that they understand, in stocks they understand their business model. So if there's stock A and stock B, and I understand the business model of stock A, I'm more willing to invest in that than in stock B. Now, of course, companies don't have return that is proportional to how much I understand their business model, right? It's completely irrelevant. They don't call me up and say, hey, how much do you understand our business model? And then they say, oh, if you understand it, let's make more money. So, but people's willingness to invest, stocks are kind of a unique animal that you say, I want to understand what I'm investing in. Now, could it be, so this we know that people like to invest in things that they understand the business model. Could it be that women are more modest about their understanding of the stock market and of companies, right? So we know that men in many cases are overconfident.
Yes.
So could it be that women are either underconfident or more accurately confident? And because they don't think they really understand how the stock market works, how Apple functions, how whoever it is, that this recognition of their lack of understanding, true versus fictitious, is basically saying we're not interested in doing this. So this is just a speculation.
Maybe, but then I think most women would never take a prescription drug or get in an elevator and take it to the 60th floor, because we don't understand those things either, right?
Well, but I think that in an elevator that is so functional, there's also no other way to do it. In a prescription, somebody is telling you exactly what to do, and it's a figure of authority. Whereas in the stock market, people are saying, look, you have choices and it's up to you to make the choice. So, you have a choice of do you put the money in cash, or do you go into the stock market? If you go to the stock market, what do you do? So that will be one speculation, that it's really about confidence and overconfidence that is underlying this. A second possibility, and we're just speculating here, a second possibility is that it's about social acceptance. There's this very interesting phenomena called social proof. And social proof is the idea that we don't know what is the right way to behave. And we look around us and we behave like the people who are around us. And in particular, we behave like the people who we think are similar to us.
Uh-huh.
So could it be that for men, all men kind of, invest their something in the stock market, so it becomes a part of the discourse, it becomes part of the social norm. Everybody expects people to do this. Where if for women, if it's not part of what they know about each other or think that they do and so on, it becomes less likely that they will keep on doing it. So this is just another speculation, but I don't really know.
I think with the second one, you pretty much hit the nail on the head, because investing for women really isn't normalized. And in fact, building wealth isn't normalized. In fact, I talked to some of my wealthy female clients and they don't want their friends to know that they have a financial advisor or can afford a financial advisor. So I do think you hit the nail on the head. And there's a lot of talk about the retirement crisis now. I mean, it doesn't really matter which research report you read. Most Americans are underprepared for retirement. Yeah. And I do think it's predictable that people would start calling on the government to solve that problem. But, I listen to your TED Talks and read your books, and I know that you are a fan of behavior modification solutions. You talk a lot about this check the box if you want to opt out solution. Yeah. So do you think that's a big enough lever to solve this cultural problem that we in the US don't save enough?
So no. So, the current retirement savings in 401ks, the amount there is just not high enough, right? So let's say you start working at age 30, you work until 65, that's 35 years, and then you live until 90. That's another 25 years. That means that you have 35 years of work and 25 years of retirement.
Yeah.
That's really hard to afford. It's really hard to afford, right? It's almost a ratio of 1-to-1. That for every year that you work, you need to save, you need to live that year, plus you need to, save for almost another year at retirement. So it's a very, very hard thing to do. So, if we save, 10% yearly, it's not going to make up for this. So I think that we need to increase the amounts that people are saving. And of course, what it means is we need to decrease the amount that people are spending. And one of the things that really bother me about financial advisors, and you tell me, what do you do, is that financial advisors come to clients and they say, tell me how much you want to save and I'll help you optimize that amount. I'll help you figure out, your risk attitude and your allocation and so on. But I once asked some financial advisors that if you spend more time with each of your clients and you learn more about their preferences and you spend more time on their portfolio, how much more could you get them to save? What would be the increase in their portfolio? And some people said 0.25%, some people said it wouldn't matter, but it was very, very small amount. And then I asked the same group, I said, if you actually talk to your client about what they're spending and you try to get them to spend less, how much do you think you could help them save more? And the numbers were often around 10% a year because you could choose one saving approach versus another and you could optimize a portfolio. But the real issue is how we're trading off spending now versus saving in the future. And I think that financial advisors need to be the money experts, right? Not just the optimization of portfolio allocation, but they need to help us figure out what to spend, what not to spend on. I work a few days a month at Google and I meet lots of young people who get paid a little bit too much. And, my friends who work at Google, in other tech companies, it's not just Google, basically get this large infusion of cash every month and they spend a lot of it. And I think if they had advisors that would help them against themselves, that would be incredibly helpful. Do you know this baseball player, something Griffin Jr.? I
don't.
Okay,
no.
so anyway, you'll excuse my ignorance. I didn't grow up in this country. I don't remember much about baseball, but there was a baseball player that I met at some conference, something Griffin Jr., very famous baseball player. And he told me that when he was a young player, he got his first professional job and got the first training, and they were kind of on the field, and the coach gave them each an envelope with their paycheck. And he opened the paycheck, and it was $2,000. He said, what? I just became a professional player. This is $2,000. How can it be? He called his manager, and his manager said, don't worry, I have your money. This is how much you have to spend on discretionary spending. If you need more money, call me and we'll talk.
I wish everyone would do that. I wish all employers would do that for their employees.
Yeah, because, the data on professional athletes is really depressing. Most of them are bankrupt within 4 years. And these are people who make a ton of money. But what happened is that often as people make more money, their quality, the spending on their lives is increasing disproportionately to that amount, and they don't save more. They actually just spend more. And this idea of helping people against themselves, I think, is very important. And for me, the realization, in behavioral economics, there's this notion that we make decisions as a function of the environment that we're in, right? That everything in our environment is a player. You open the refrigerator, and the design of the refrigerator changes what you eat, right? The fact that we put fresh vegetables in an opaque drawer in the bottom of the refrigerator, and we put soda on the side of the refrigerator, and whatever it is that we put on the front shelf, basically means you open the refrigerator and you don't think fruits and vegetables. You think whatever you see ahead of you. And the way that Apple Pay and Android and credit card, all of those are designs of the environment. And the fact that every coffee shop is trying to pump smell of fresh baked goods and coffee out to get you to be tempted to buy this. So the world is really not thinking about our long-term well-being. Most of the players in the world are thinking about their short-term well-being rather than our long-term well-being. And we fail. We fail all the time. And the question is, who is on our corner? Who is in our corner to help us think better and really make trade-offs between now and later in a more thoughtful way? And retirement saving is one of those things that we don't have a second chance, right? It's not as if you get to retirement at age 70 or 65 and you say, oh, I made some mistakes, let me go back. It's over. It's done.
Right.
So it's not something that we should leave to people to learn by themselves, right? You could say, oh, let's let people learn by themselves about dating because you can do it multiple. But, even dating, we don't have that much experience. So,
you can do more trial and error there.
That's right. You could do more trial and error, not a lot, but you could do some. But with savings, we really don't have much opportunity. I mean, we can save a bit more and we can save a bit less. But some of the mistakes we make, certainly at a young age, when compound interest would have been in our favor, there's just no going back.
Right. I will say, to answer your question about digging into someone's spending, you really have to have someone's permission before you give them that kind of advice or coaching, because they feel a little defensive or violated if you start questioning what they spend their money on. So not only do they have to hire you as their financial advisor, but then you need to get specific articulated permission to say, let's dig into your spending.
And it is painful. And we did the project once. We call it Spending Buddies.
Okay.
And we asked people, actually it was all women, but we asked women to meet once a month, show each other their credit card bill and explain every item. And the thought was that after doing it a few times, the voice of your friend will start echoing in your mind before you decide to buy something, not after, right? Because if the experience was only about explaining things after the fact and it wouldn't change behavior, then it has no value. But we were hoping that it would kind of start, you would look at something in the store and you would say, oh, do I really want this? Can I really explain it later to my friend? And it was only a small study, but it was very effective. And by the way, I don't think it's good just for women. I think it's good for everybody to have some kind of more accountability into what we're doing. And I think you're right that it's a very tough role to take, because often we feel embarrassed and defensive and so on. But it's incredibly helpful to be able to justify our behavior to somebody else,
so
especially somebody we appreciate. Yeah, that experiment did work. but you're right. It's a painful process, right? It's not fun, but it's also not fun to get to retirement with not enough money.
Right. So your new book is called Payoff: The Hidden Logic That Shapes Our Motivations. Who's this book for, and what inspired you to write it?
Who is it for? Everybody. No. So the book is really about all the ways in which our motivation are not just about money. And I start the book with a very personal experience of a kid that was very badly burned, and his mother asked me for some help, and I helped them out. And throughout helping them out, it was nothing but misery for me. I cried, it was difficult, it was painful, it was emotionally draining and so on. But nevertheless, I was motivated to try and help him out. And I spent a lot of time. I actually just wrote him the day before yesterday, even though it was we started talking a few years ago, and it's still not easy. And through that initial point, I said, what are we trying to maximize? And we think sometimes that we try to maximize pleasure, and that's kind of the pleasure principle. But I'm saying, is this really the case? If you look at all the things that we do, from climbing mountains to helping people to succeeding at work to raising kids and so on, how much of it is really about pure pleasure maximization? Pure pleasure maximization will be, sitting on some beach drinking mojitos. This is not what we're striving for. This is not what we try to do. Maybe we'll do a couple of days of those things, but it's not what we would call a fulfilling life. And therefore, I try to explore what are all the ways that motivate us. What are all the things that give us a true sense of meaning and purpose and deep joy, not just the superficial joy. And from this perspective, it's a very important for people who run business and try to motivate other people. But it's also important for us to understand our own motivation. We need to motivate ourselves to do all kinds of things. We need to motivate ourselves to save and to have relationships and to keep friendship and to do exercise and to do all kinds of things. And understanding our own motivation and the motivation of others, I think, is part of the human condition. We need to understand it better. So I think there is something in this for everybody who's trying to motivate themselves or others.
And the one thing I was able to get about the book because it's not even released yet. And as of the airing of this episode, it will have been released and we'll share with you how to get it. But as of the day of our conversation, the book isn't out yet. But I read that one of the things or studies that you did was about how people make trade-offs between compliments, pizza, and money.
Yes.
And what you learned is that people are more motivated by pizza than anything else?
So this was a study at Intel, the chip manufacturer, and we basically measured whether motivating employees was better off with money, pizza, or compliments. And we found that they were very, very different, the three of them. And on the day that we offered the bonus, they all worked the same way. But the day after the bonus, the money basically backfired. What happened on the money is that the day you offered me money, I worked hard, but the next day I said, yesterday you offered me money, I worked hard, today you're not offering me money, I'm not interested anymore. And the other two, the compliments and the pizza, did not backfire in the same way. So the idea is that a lot of work has a huge component of goodwill. When we lived in a world in which people did something very basic and specific, like layering bricks or pumping water or something like this that you could measure exactly, you could pay people based on their productivity. But as we move forward in the knowledge economy, we depend a lot on goodwill. We depend on the fact that people would want to perform, that people would think about work on the way home and in the shower and focus and work hard and so on. We can measure how much time people sit on their chair by the computer, but we can't measure focus and concentration and so on. And what happened is that, of course, we have to pay people. There's no question about it. But payment doesn't necessarily get you goodwill. And sometimes it can actually undermine goodwill. Whereas compliments are much more of a relationship between employer and employee. They kind of represent kind of a different system of evaluation, one that has more long-term approach rather than short-term money for performance. And therefore, you actually get more goodwill from things like gifts and compliments than with paying exactly for performance.
And this is compliments with an I, right? The boss telling you did a great job.
Yeah, in this case, it was exactly like this compliment, but it was actually in a text message.
Okay,
so it didn't even say it explicitly.
And so people chose the pizza over the money, but the money was just $30. Was the pizza worth more than $30?
No, it was actually worth less. But it wasn't that people chose it. So a quarter of the people were told nothing. A quarter of the people were told, if you perform at this level, you'll get money. A quarter of the people were told, if you perform at this level, you get pizza. A quarter of the people were told, if you perform at this level, you'll get a compliment and a text message from the boss. So it wasn't what people choose. Actually, people often choose the thing that don't motivate them the most. It was that when the different type of rewards were offered, people's motivation changed.
I see.
So imagine this podcast, and imagine if you said, Dan, would you mind doing a podcast with me? I will give you $25. What do you think will happen to my motivation? Do I say, gee, I get to chat with Hillary, plus I get $25. That's great. No. What would I say? I would say, oh, $25, this is work. I'm not interested, right? Give me a couple of $1,000, we can have a chat again. Right. So what happened is that money is a motivator, but it also changes the relationship of the exchange. And we don't always see that. So imagine you worked for me and I said, Hillary, we have two options. I can either send you to the mountains for a weekend, or I can give you $1,000 in cash. Now, you would probably prefer the cash because you'd say, oh, give me the cash. I'll go somewhere cheaper and I'll buy the new Apple, whatever. Mm-hmm. But the question, of course, is not just what's more efficient for me to transfer wealth to you. The question is what would get you to care more about the work? So imagine that I offer you now this choice and you choose the money, or imagine I just send you to the weekend, to the mountains. And imagine that in 3 weeks, I ask you to stay late one night. I said, we have this project, we really have to finish it. Would you mind pulling an all-nighter? Under which of those conditions would you be willing to pull an all-nighter? And it's not the one that I gave you the cash. It's the one when I showed my appreciation in a more social way, where it's a part of a system that basically said, I did a favor to you, and we have now a more social kind of favor for favor system rather than paying cash for performance. And that's something that people don't always see. For example, think about something like the No Child Left Behind policy that we had in the US for a while now, where we basically took teachers who were very motivated and interested in their profession, and all of a sudden we say, hey, if you work very hard and your kids do very well on this specific test, and then you'll get $400 more. And you have to teach the test throughout the year for this to work out. And basically what we did was to eliminate the motivation from most teachers, right? So sometimes what we do is that by paying, we change the nature of the relationship, and often not for the best.
Great. So I see this book as being especially applicable for employers and parents and anyone who wants to motivate people who are dating, who want to motivate people. And we will put a link to buy the book in the show notes at hillaryhendershot.com/45. Dan, my last question for you. Where can someone start if they've discovered today that their life is negatively impacted by irrationality? What would be the first step to a more consciously controlled life?
So I think the first step is probably to kind of be able to recognize some of the big mistakes. I think that living a life where you think all the time about small mistakes, it's just not doable. I think what we need to do is we need to, maybe once a year around New Year is not a bad time, is to revisit the big decisions. And some big decisions are clear, like buying a house, switching job, getting married, having kids. Some big decisions are just combination of lots of small decisions like buying coffee, groceries, going out, and so on, and revisit those decisions and then basically ask ourselves, are those decisions the right approach? And do it once a year. You can't do it all along. And then ask yourself this question and then figure out a strategy for the next year. So you can say, you know what? By the way, one of the things we find in terms of regret in lots of categories so far, it seems that people really regret going out compared to all other categories. People spend a lot of money on this and don't get as much joy as they think they do it, but they somehow don't seem to remember.
Going out for dinner and drinks like that?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Relatively to the amount of cost, people don't seem to derive the joy that they expect from this. This is the finding we have. So you sit there and you say, here's a category I think I'm spending too much on, and here's a category I'm not spending enough on, and here's something I do. And let me try to figure out how in the next year I could align myself more closely to something that is going to do better. So I don't think that living rationally on a day-to-day is possible, but I think that once a while we can kind of examine our life, find out where the big points of mistakes are, and then try to do something about that specifically.
Fantastic. Sounds perfect timed for what will be the end of 2016 as this episode airs, that people could spend some time thinking about broad strokes. What are the things that you're doing right? What are the things that you're doing wrong? And where do you want to improve instead of trying to be, as Dan says, rational on a daily basis? Thank you so much for being here. It's an honor to have you on the podcast. I'm excited for your book. I've read all of your books and recommend that my listeners do the same. And we really appreciate your presence.
My pleasure. Thanks a lot, and looking forward to our next discussion.
Thank you. Profit Boss, do you hate getting unsolicited advice? I kind of do. Whether it's well-intentioned or not, any kind of splaining just feels, I don't know, sort of aggressive and unwelcome. Of course, when I see someone who's important to me and they're struggling, sometimes it's tough to bite my tongue and just be there for them. So it's kind of a conundrum, right? We aren't here to run our friends' lives, no matter how well qualified we are to do it. On the other hand, if you discover something that's really made a difference to you, don't you just want to share it with everyone? I mean, it would be really presumptuous of me to just assume that my little podcast is something every listener just can't wait to share. But I do know what I hear from my listeners about how Profit Boss Radio has helped them to start changing old money habits and feel more in control and hopeful about getting out in front of their financial security. And I have to think that for every person I've reached, there are thousands more who might feel the same way if they get the chance. So if you're one of my listeners or in our Facebook group and you know at least one or two people in your social network could use an encouraging word, let me invite you to let them know about the podcast and about our Facebook group. Just hit the share button in your podcast app. It'll give you a good feeling, I promise. And you'll be helping me accomplish my big, audacious goal of empowering 1 million women to take charge of their financial futures and become millionaires. Lastly, let me just say I'm truly honored to have earned a place in your busy schedule. I know you've got a lot of demands on your time and attention, and I'm so totally grateful for the little part of it that you share with me. So thank you, and let's get together next week for another episode of PBR.
Thank you for listening to Profit Boss Radio, where creating success on our own terms happens every day. You're not alone in your journey to a rich life, and that's why Hillary is here to add value in each and every episode. See you next time on the podcast for women and money.